profile, I wanted to ask, why did you decide to get into law?
To get into law?
Yeah.
You know, my father was a lawyer, and I watched the justice system play out through what he would bring to us on the dinner table. And he loved being a lawyer. In fact, he liked the word counselor almost as good as lawyer, because he viewed himself as someone who was counseling people through problems and using the law to do it. And so it was kind of inspiring throughout my whole young life. And then I had the chance to get into law school, went to Stanford Law School, get out, and it turns out I just love being in the courtroom. And that's where the law came alive for me. So I went right to the U.S. Attorney's Office, got to do trials, got to do arguments in front of juries and judges. It was fantastic. And then I got on the defense side, got to do it on behalf of individuals and organizations. And it really is something that's important. Here in America, one of the greatest things we have done for over 200 years is the presumption of innocence, forcing the government actually to prove someone's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The verdict that comes out doesn't say guilty or innocent. It says guilty or not guilty because you're presumed innocent if and until the government is able to meet its burden of proof. I believe in that old adage that says the prosecution always wins when justice is done. It doesn't say the prosecution always wins when it gets a conviction, because there are times when the prosecution realizes it doesn't have the evidence, or that evidence is legally inadmissible. And justice to be done actually requires a conviction not to be had. So I'm a big believer in the system. It's been an honor to serve that system. I hope to continue it as district attorney.
So you were talking about mistrials, or you said that when you have it. So
not actually mistrials. Very often, as a prosecutor who's building the investigation phase, it can happen at any point in the process. A prosecutor investigates a case and then makes a charging decision. But even once that charging decision's made, it's not locked into stone, because there can be a situation where you find out during that entire process that the evidence just isn't there. I had a situation once where I actually had a confession, a videotaped confession. Turns out it was obtained illegally. So I decided not to bring the case in the first place, even though everyone was pretty sure who actually did the crime, because we couldn't prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt if we weren't able to use that confession.
And your opponent, he has held press conferences when he has looked at evidence and then someone was exonerated. I mean, is that something you plan to continue? Because you're talking about evidence. What if there is evidence after someone is already serving prison time that wasn't available during the trial that may exonerate them?
So if someone's factually innocent, I've represented people and been to prisons all up and down this state. Being in prison every day, even one day, is a horrible experience. So if I come across situations where someone's actually factually innocent, I'll get them out of prison the next day. But I actually can do it much more efficiently than George Gascon, because I've actually been a defense attorney for 24 years, been a prosecutor for 10. George Gascon has never prosecuted or defended a single criminal case in his entire life. So when he looks at this file, when he looks at evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, he's never actually done the job. I've actually done that job, and if someone is factually innocent, we'll get them out of prison the very next day.
And you have said that you are going to be the hard middle. What does that mean?
So here's what the hard middle means. It's a rejection of extreme policies. George Gascon has been practicing an extreme pro-criminal decarceration policy. It says he doesn't look at the facts in the law. He's predetermined that there are certain crimes and certain criminals, like juveniles stealing just under $950, like gangs engaging in gang violence, that he will not prosecute that enhancement for the gang or those juveniles, not because of the facts in the law, but because of his personal political agenda. I reject that. I also reject the other end of the pendulum swing, which is mass incarceration. What the hard middle is it's hard because you got to do the hard work. Blanket policies are inherently lazy. The hard middle requires you to look at each case individually, look at each defendant, the defendant's background, the crime committed, and the impact on the victim, to determine who the true threats are to our public safety. Those are often the repeat offenders who need to be behind bars, and quite honestly, the ones that aren't. Your first-time nonviolent offender still has to pay back a debt to society if they violate society's laws, but the punishment needs to be proportional to the crime. So that could be community service. It could be restitution. Pay it back if you stole something. Or if you have a serious drug addiction, a diversion program that offers you a choice. You can go to prison, or you can do an 18-month rehab program that if you get through one day at a time, we'll give you a certificate at the end and wipe your record clean of that crime committed. That's what the hard middle, balanced, proportional, smart, and common sense approach does compared to George Gascon's adoption of extreme pro-criminal blanket policies.
And do you think that youth should be something that is factored in, the age of the suspect and their maturity?
You always factor in every factor. That's the whole point of looking at a defendant's background and all the relevant factors. That all is factored into first determining whether or not you have the evidence to show beyond a reasonable doubt that someone committed a crime, and then figuring out what punishment is proportional to that crime, weighing in these factors of the hard middle calculation. And one of the primary factors is the defendant and the defendant's background.
And I'm sure you saw the LA Times analysis. They're saying that the felony charges, the rate of felony charges is only down about 3% from his predecessor, Jackie Lacey, so that although a lot of crime is being blamed on him, there are other factors as well. To you, what are some of the other factors that are
Well, let me show you how George Gascon is gaslighting the public with these focus on filing rates. What a filing rate is, it doesn't tell you how many more crimes have actually been committed. Let me give you an example. With organized retail crimes, back in the year 2000, there were 109 of these cases. And the filing rate, the amount of percentage that you would actually file, was in somewhere in the 80%. Now, fast forward, we got 2023. Do you know what the number of organized retail crime cases is? Over 500. That's gone up by over 400%. But his filing rate is still in the 80s. So what he says, oh, my filing rate's the same as before, but he doesn't tell people that organized retail cases have gone up 400% since he's been the district attorney, in large part, and a contributing factor are his pro-criminal policies that have emboldened criminals to commit these crimes.
But it's not the only county that is seeing retail theft go up. It's also Houston, some other places as well. So what other factors are driving this? Because it's not just the DA.
Well, in Los Angeles, it's in large part Gascon's issue, or his policies, that are a driving force, a contributing force, certainly not the sole force. And by the way, when Gascon tries to justify...
let me jump in there, because
sure.
You said it's not the sole.
Right.
So what else do you think? What else is factoring in?
Well, I think, for instance, let's take Los Angeles and let's take residential burglaries. So with residential burglaries, we have found people coming in from the border. This is people from Chile, Venezuela, Colombia. So the DA's office and local law enforcement have to work as a task force with the federal government to actually go after these folks coming in through the border, because the federal government's in charge, and then when they're committing crimes here, catching them and making sure they get adequate bail so that they're around for the trial. That's a task force. Gascon's not leading that task force. Gascon is basically silently on the back, emboldening these criminals who get arrested in the morning and out by the afternoon, not working with the federal government to go ahead and basically send a uniform message, and not just to, by the way, foreign nationals who are coming here, but now we have local gangs that are engaged in residential burglary from South LA, for instance. And again, when you're not enforcing the gang enhancement against local gangs, they're emboldened to keep going as much as they can.
You talked about the Chilean criminal rings. It's also happening in Miami. It's happening in London. Happening in Spain to a friend of mine, actually in Madrid. So again, I mean, it's not just his policies. If other cities are also dealing with the same thing. So what do you think needs to happen? And what other factors are factoring in? I mean, what else is driving this?
So what else is driving this? Again, in Gascon's situation, it's a combination. I'll go through the various factors. You have his policies that are emboldening criminals and gangs, because he will not enforce the gang enhancement. He is basically enforcing a zero bail policy. So if you get arrested, you will be released. And then and then working with the federal government in a joint federal, state, local task force, not being done by Gascon. When you point to other jurisdictions, that is his argument, that LA County is no worse than, and he lists a whole bunch of cities around the United States. Let me make this crystal clear.
But if other cities are, I just, because, I do want to, so if other cities and international cities, are dealing with it, yes, you can argue that his policies are part of it, but aren't there other factors as well? I know that Todd Spitzer down in Orange County, when it comes to South American gangs, he's pointing to, the visa program and so forth.
You know what he's pointing to? He's pointing to LA County. Because they're not coming.
I spoke to him, and he actually said that there's a visa program that he would like to see.
He is,
Yeah.
and that's working with the federal government. That's the point. You do not see George Gascon and Martin Estrada, the U.S. Attorney for the Central District of California, doing joint press conferences telling how they're going to deal with the foreign individuals coming in and local street gangs. You don't see that. And as far as other jurisdictions dealing with this, let me make this crystal clear. Gascon's defense of himself is that we are no worse than, and he points to a whole bunch of jurisdictions. LA used to lead and be the sort of the prime crime fighter amongst all these jurisdictions, amongst all the DA's offices in California, even among the nation. We can go back to being that leadership position. Just can't do it George Gascon at the head.
And I know you've been a very vocal opponent of Prop 47, and unless 36 passes, it is still the law. So how do you plan to work around it?
So you don't work, let me give you an example of what's been going on in LA County. George Gascon effectively had a two-step process.
I want to hear what you're going to do. How do you plan to?
Well, in order to understand what I would do differently, you have to understand what George Gascon has done. And if you already understand that, you can explain that to me, and I'm happy to listen to you.
Well, no,
No, if you want to do that, I'll listen to you. Otherwise, actually listen to the answer, and if the answer is not sufficient, you can ask a follow-up question. So, what George Gascon did is a two-step process to decriminalize different types of theft and drug use through Proposition 47. He first turned back in 2014 when he authored Proposition 47. He turned certain felonies into misdemeanor for theft, and this is now under $950, and for drug use, using meth, heroin, fentanyl, all became misdemeanors instead of felonies. Then he came into office as a DA, and he said, I will no longer prosecute misdemeanors, which means he's effectively decriminalized theft under $950, particularly for juveniles, and he's decreased the use of meth, heroin, and fentanyl amongst everybody here in LA County because he won't enforce misdemeanors. So what would I do differently? I would actually enforce those laws. Because right now, those laws are on the books. They are misdemeanors. You can hold people accountable, as they do in the 57 other counties in California, for misdemeanors. And that goes back to the hard middle approach. If someone steals $100 from a 7-Eleven, you're not going to throw them in state prison. But will you possibly go ahead and say you got to pay that money back and go through the system? Absolutely. Will you say maybe you got to do some community service and pay your debt back to society? Definitely. You know, it's interesting, and you might have seen the social media video recently of 12 to 15-year-olds who rode their bikes to a 7-Eleven, dropped the bikes right outside, ran inside, ransacked the place, stuffed their pants with stuff that they had stolen and walked out. DA Gascon, his answer to that is to not prosecute any of those juveniles. But you know what the parents did? Apparently there are 14 parents who walk their kids into police stations and turn their own kids in, because they wanted to teach their children the lesson that Gascon doesn't want to teach young people, that there are consequences for actions, that stealing is wrong, that you will be punished proportionally if you commit these crimes. And that's what I would do. I would go in and adopt a hard middle approach to proportionally make sure people are held accountable if they want to violate society's laws.
And so I know that you are up quite a bit, right, 30 points in the latest poll. How are you feeling about that?
You know, we don't treat it as 30 points up, we actually treat it as 30 points down. Because anything can happen in the next 22 days, and I got to keep the pedal all the way to the floorboard, all the way to November 5th in order to win this election. But what the 30 points signifies is a deep unpopularity of George Gascon. That he's run this special social experiment for 3.5 years, he's failed. People feel less safe today than they did when he came into office. And when they get to know myself with 34 years of criminal justice experience, someone who wants to bring that hard middle approach of smart, common sense, proportional criminal justice and accountability with a focus on deterrence rather than filling the prisons, they say, okay, that is the guy we want to vote for. And they're going to hopefully fill in that little bubble next to the name of Nathan Hochman for district attorney.
You know, your campaign has tried to make this a referendum on Gascon's policies. Do you feel that the lead in the polling suggests that you've done that successfully?
Well, yes, in the sense that I think the impact of Gascon's pro-criminal extreme blanket policies and the failure of those policies to keep people safe has crossed political lines. We're talking Democrat, Independent, Republican, demographic lines, black, white, Latino, Asian, every religion out there, every group, and geographic lines. I mean, I've gone down from Long Beach and San Pedro to Los Angeles, all the way up to Lancaster, from here in Santa Monica to the San Gabriel, San Fernando, and Santa Clarita valleys. And I've talked to now at this point thousands of people. And what they say uniformly to me is enough is enough. This guy's been given his chance, he has failed, and we are ready for change.
And there is still a significant number of undecideds, and I have talked to some people who are on the fence. They don't like Gascon. Some say they feel like they don't know you. They just know you're against Gascon. And others say that they're worried that we're going to go too far back to the way it was before, and they want, something different. What would you say to them?
What I would say to them is that first, go to my website, Nathan Hochman, HOCHMAN.com, and we lay out an entire blueprint of justice. Because I'm absolutely convinced if I can get information to any voter about myself and Gascon, that coin flip that usually is a 50-50 proposition, I can win 10 out of 10 times. And so I would also tell those people that I reject these extreme policies. Gascon keeps saying over and over again that I believe in mass incarceration. I don't know how many times I can say that, George, you are gaslighting the public about my record. I don't believe in mass incarceration. I've been a defense attorney. It doesn't work. I believe in that hard, middle, proportional, smart, effective approach. So I would tell people to look, read up on what I actually stand for. Look at my 34 years of experience against his literally 0 years of experience being in the courtroom as a prosecutor or defense counsel. And then look at the fact that 98% of his prosecutors voted to support his recall. That 37 cities across LA County passed no confidence motions in George Gascon, and before that there had been no cities that had ever passed a no confidence motion. And he's got 10,000 unfiled cases based on the system that he set up, and before that there had only been dozens of unfiled cases, and there are over 200 lawyers. 20% of his workforce has literally left because they refuse to work for someone that they believe engages in illegal, unethical, or ineffective policies.
And another thing that I hear sometimes, not specifically about DA, but just in general, when I go to neighborhoods like Huntington Park, or I go to lower income neighborhoods, they feel that when people talk about crime, and when there's the focus on crime, it's on the west side. And they often feel like they're being ignored.
You know what? And sometimes they are being ignored, but let me give you some statistics that show that they absolutely should not be ignored. 87% of homicides that occur, the victims of those homicides are black and Hispanic. 71% of violent crimes that occur here in Los Angeles, those victims are black and Hispanic. Black women represent 4% of the county, yet they are the victims of 28% of the violent crimes. Why isn't George Gascon talking about this over the last 4 years? He has talked about the disproportionate effect that the criminal justice system has had on criminals of color, and that is absolutely something we have to continue to focus on. But he has not talked about the disproportionate effect that criminals have had on people of color, and that's something that will be first and foremost their safety, keeping them safe in a Hochman administration.
So how will you do that?
The way you'll do it again is you'll go back to a hard middle approach. You'll get rid of blanket pro-criminal policies that tell gangs, for instance, that you can prey on people, and it's usually people of color, it's usually in poor communities and vulnerable communities, without the DA's office saying categorically that if you engage in a gang crime, a violent crime, and then your participation was motivated by you being in a gang, we're going to bring an enhancement that's over 30 years old and was designed to cripple the power of criminal street gangs. George Gascon has basically said we're not interested in going after gangs. I I would be interested in going after gangs because they are preying on people of color.
And what don't voters know about you?
I think that what voters don't know about me is that I'm probably a lifelong Angelino. I was born here, I grew up here, I've been married 31 years, I've raised my 3 kids here. And I've had 34 years of criminal justice experience as a prosecutor and a DA. I'll be the first DA in history that actually has the background of a prosecutor and a defense attorney. I'll also be the first DA in history that's actually personally prosecuted a dirty cop, someone who was stealing drugs, guns, and money from drug dealers. This is back in the 1990s when I and a team of prosecutors convicted 16 of them. But I've also set up the LA Sheriff's Foundation and raised the Sheriff's Department money for valuable resources that are outside their budget. So I believe that, again, if a law enforcement officer crosses the line, they should absolutely be prosecuted, but that the overwhelming numbers of law enforcement officers, those are the folks running into the building when the bullets are flying, and those officers deserve our respect, our admiration, and if I'm a DA, our partnership.
And your campaign chose to have this interview here in Santa Monica. Why?
Probably because when I want to go ahead and experience one of the most beautiful parts of LA County, I grew up in West Los Angeles and I've come to Santa Monica forever. I mean, look behind us. I mean, this is why people used to come to LA in droves. We've actually been losing population. People have been voting with their feet and have left Los Angeles County in the last 3.5 years while Gascon's been our DA, because it's not the high taxes, the traffic and the smog or the earthquakes that got them to leave. It was fear for themselves and their family, fear to go out not just at night but during the day, fear to they have to have a decision on what they're going to wear or watch, or when they get back to their car, whether their car's been broken into that day, or when they get back to their home, whether or not they're going to be on the Citizen app or the Nextdoor app or another app, because they are now the victim of someone who's broken into their home. That fear is something that I'm running to deal with head on to restore safety in this community.